Now, by the time you get to the next section, we find ourselves again looking at point number 5 or problem number 5. And in the fifth section, let's see, in the fifth section, we get to 7:15 to 28. And he says, I have seen during my lifetime some futility. There's a righteous man who perishes in his righteousness, and there's a wicked man who prolongs his life in wickedness. And here's what I found out. Life doesn't always seem fair when it comes to the length of somebody's life. Really good people die young, and really bad people live on for a long time. Not as a rule, but just sometimes. And then he says, you know, I found out that I have to respond to life, so the first thing I need to do is not be a prude. That's verse 16. Don't be excessively righteous and overly wise. Don't walk into everybody's party and tell them how they're wrong. Don't be a prude. But conversely, don't be an idiot. That's verse 17. Don't be excessively wicked and do not be a fool. Why should you die before your time? I'm pretty amazed at the number of people that try stunts that really normal human beings would not think people would try. I was watching some teenagers elaborately set up on a YouTube their parents were away, and they were actually on the second floor of the house using bicycles coming down, making a ramp off the back of the house. I was looking at this, noticing that it happened to have started snowing as they were doing it, and was just picturing the size of the bill at the hospital. That's what I was doing. They were going, oh, cool, now we can do it in ice. I mean, don't be an idiot, is what I'm saying. Okay, so there it says, here's the other thing. I have to understand, it says, it is good for you to grasp one thing and also not let go of the other. I have to follow through on things. You know, an awful lot of people treat relationships like Tarzan treats vines in the jungle. They go across, they let go of one as they pick up another. Now I got a new friend, you're gone. Now I got a new friend, you're gone. I got a new friend, you're gone. They literally go through life using up friends and leaving dangling vines everywhere. If you've ever felt like the vine dangling after the friend went by, you know exactly what I'm talking about. He said, listen, you can't just let go of everything. I find people do this with ministries. God called me to this. They dropped the other thing and walked off. Everybody else on the team was building what they were with until they were now called to something else, and they just drop it, and there it goes. There has to be a better maturity to the transitions. He said, you know what I did? I decided I would do something. Look at verse 15. I want you to underline the words in verse 15, I have seen. Now go down to verse 23, I tested. Now go down to verse 25, I directed my mind. He said, I decided that I would take a look at some things, I would test some things, I would investigate some things. And what I discovered is this, verse 27. I have discovered, says the preacher, adding one thing to another to find an explanation, which I am still seeking but have not found. I have found one man among 1,000, but I've not found a woman among all these. Now, what does that mean? It means that he happens to be a king. And as such, he's not a queen. He's a king. And so around him are all kinds of people. And he has found one man he could trust out of 1,000 people. And as one king who happened to be fairly well known as a heavy dater, can we say that? The guy had lots of wives and lots of concubines. He could trust exactly how many of them? None. Now, does that say that there's some defect or flaw in women that does not exist in men? Well, I wouldn't get too excited about a 1 out of 1,000 ratio, even for the male set in this. But here's what I think he's saying. He's saying if you happen to be a person in power, you can hardly find anybody you can trust. That's what he's trying to say. And ultimately, his own experience was he came out with one guy out of 1,000. So what do? You do verse 29. This is the shortest of his conclusions. And his conclusion for part 5 was this. It's one verse. It says, behold, I have found only this, that God made men upright, but they have sought out many devices. In other words, don't blame God for the fall of mankind. It's not God's fault that people act the way they do. I get this all the time. Well, if God was God like you say, then why do bad things happen? Do you want him to determine your breakfast cereal, or would you like to choose that? Then what if it has something in it that's killing you? So here's what you want. You want the freedom to do what you want, but the freedom to blame God for whatever goes wrong because of you doing what you want. How does that work exactly? And the truth of the matter is, that's what he concluded. God didn't make men to be what they are. They became that because of sin. He built them okay. They messed it up after they got it. So by the time we get to part 6, we pick up the second half of the book. And from 1 to 14, we see that there is a whole issue of problems of authority. Now, I want to zero in on problems of authority, see if we can see them. Who is like the wise man and who knows the interpretation of a matter? A man's wisdom illumines him and causes him his stern face to beam. You know what he says? Students, he says, as you grow and you learn, your face will shine. You will shine with learning. Things that really matter in life, when you learn them, there's a satisfaction that shows on your face. Because there are a few people here with the hair of the almond blossom, let me offer this caution. When you stop learning, you start dying. When all your discussions are about the way it used to be, and none of them are about the way it's going to be, then you are looking in reverse. There's probably no one in this room who will have a grandchild that will ever drive a car. There are 5 driverless cars driving around Las Vegas all week this week for the new electronics show. Almost all of us will have children that we're going to have to say someday in the future, back in the day, we used to drive the car. It didn't drive us. Really, Grandpa? How did you do that? We turned wheels. We made it go. Wow! Now, conversely, we're going to have to say to our grandchildren, there used to be these guys called truck drivers, because the trucks will drive themselves. The world is changing fast, and we can stay on what it used to be, and we can decide that that's the world that we want, and that every world that's going to come after this is a bad one, and that's only going to make you grumpy. He said, let me tell you some things about authority. Keep the command of the king because of the oath before God. That is, respect authority because it's God's authority. Do not be in a hurry to leave him. Do not join in an evil matter, for he will do whatever he pleases. In other words, don't join a coup. Avoid judgment. There's no reason for you to be found on the wrong. By the way, he's the king, so his perspective on this might be slightly skewed. Don't go against the king. By the way, I'm the king, says the king. Verse 4 says, since the word of the king is authoritative, who will say to him, what are you doing? He said, as I've gotten older, I've realized I can do whatever I want because I'm king. And nobody's really going to say anything about it. So here's the thing. I would advise you on this in verse 5. Don't try to test authority. He who keeps a royal command experiences no trouble, for a wise heart knows the proper time and procedure. If you want to bring about change, there's a way to do it. Challenging the king is the way to lose your head. Verse 6, he says there's a proper time and procedure for every delight, though a man's trouble is heavy upon him. In other words, wait for the right time to rid yourself of your burden. Verse 7. If no one knows what will happen, who can tell him when it will happen? He says, don't push. You don't know the outcome of things. And because you don't know the outcome of things, don't go walking in and sell to the king. We got to do this now or what? You don't know what's going to happen. So how do you know when it's going to happen? Verse 8. No man has authority to restrain the wind with the wind, or authority over the day of death. There's no discharge in the time of war, and evil will not deliver those who practice it. In other words, some things are beyond your control. In the middle of a war, you're not going to get a 3-day pass. That's not going to happen. And by the way, you're not going to be able to determine, I need to put off my death for a couple days. I got a couple other things I got to get worked out. There's some things you just don't get to choose. All this I've seen, verse 9, and applied to my mind to every deed that was done under the sun, wherein a man has exercised authority over another man to his hurt. So then I have seen the wicked buried, those who used to go in and out of the holy place, and they are soon forgotten in the city where they did this. See, a good life lasts. A good religion does not. You can go in and out and do all the religious things you want. If you haven't behaved in faith toward other people, it doesn't have a lasting effect. People don't remember that you used to always go to that church. They know if you served. They know if you made a difference in lives. And so he says, because the sentence against an evil deed is not executed quickly, therefore the hearts of the sons of men among them are fully given to do evil. He says, listen, deterrence works. Verse 12, although a sinner does evil 100 times and may lengthen his life, still I know that it will be well for those who fear God, who fear him openly, but it will not be well for the evil man, and he will not lengthen his days like a shadow because he does not fear God. He says, it's going to look like some guys are getting away with things for a long period of time, like God is not paying attention. He really is paying attention. It's going to look like they're actually getting away with it. They're not. In the end, every dog has his day. Verse 14, there's futility, which is done on the earth. That is, there is a righteous man to whom it happens according to the deeds of the wicked. On the other hand, there are evil men to whom it happens according to the deeds of the righteous. I say this is futility. This side of heaven, bad people seem to get away with bad, and good people don't always get paid. That's the way it really is. And he said, this just doesn't seem right. This just seems empty. But now you come upon, wait, another set of conclusions. They start in 8:15 and they go all the way through 9:2. Here are the conclusions. I want you to enjoy the moments that are taken for granted. And I want you to understand that God grants time for you for a purpose. He says, verse 15, I commended pleasure, for there's nothing good for a man under the sun except to eat and to drink and to be merry, and this will stand by him in his toils throughout the days of his life, which God has given him under the sun. In other words, work really hard. Do a good day's work. Put in your whole hours, but have some fun along the way. Don't forget in the building of your life to actually live, to actually enjoy time with people. Laugh. Have some outrageous fun. And then he says in verse 16, I want you to understand, when I gave my heart to know wisdom and to see the task which has been done on the earth, even though one can never sleep day or night, I saw every work of God. I concluded that man cannot discover the work which has been done under the sun. Even though man should seek laboriously, he will not discover it. And though the wise man should say, I know, he cannot discover it. He said, here's what I figured out. I figured out that I have to recognize life isn't going to make sense here. And no matter what I do, I'm never going to really understand the total plan. No matter how smart I appear to be, no matter how wise I appear to be, I'm never going to really grasp everything that's going on. So I'm not supposed to act as though I know the future of life on earth. I don't. Here's what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to look at it and understand that God knows. That's what's important. When I can't understand his plan, I know who he is. So I trust that. And verse 1, chapter 9 goes on and says, for I have taken all this to my heart and explained it, that righteous men, wise men, and their deeds are in the hand of God. Man does not know whether it will be love or hatred. Anything awaits him. It is the same for all. There is one fate for the righteous and for the wicked, for the good and for the clean and for the unclean, for the man who offers a sacrifice and for the one who does not offer a sacrifice. He says, look, the disposition of everybody, at the end of everybody's life, the second number on the stone above their burial is when they died. Now, if they were wonderful people, it's still a number, they're still dead. But he says, I've come to the place that you can't know the future, you can't know how it all works out on the earth. He's not talking about eternity, he's talking about under the sun and on the earth. And he's saying, you don't know how any of those things work. He said, I came to the place that I need to be careful and humble about what I think I know. When teaching prophecy, I need to be aware. I need to know I know the broad strokes, but I don't really understand how everything relates. We need to be a little bit humble. When a plane flies into a building, it's not because we have casino gambling. Because when we say stuff like that, we're saying stuff we don't know, and we just look stupid, and we make God look stupid. We would be better off stepping back and going, yeah, we live in a fallen world, and the system is broken, and bad things happen. And there's coming a day when God will deal with that. Okay, so his ending point again comes back to, look, I've seen this problem with oppression, and I end up saying, God knows what he's doing. God cares, and I'm not supposed to act as though if I know everything about the future on earth. When I get to the seventh one, the seventh one's real short, so we can zip right through it. 9:3-6. This is an evil in all that is done under the sun. There's one fate for all men. Furthermore, the hearts of the sons of men are full of evil, and insanity is in their hearts throughout their lives. People are crazy and then they die. That's what he says. What a great observation. Afterwards, they go to the dead. For whoever is joined with all the living, there is hope. Surely a live dog is better than a dead lion. For the living know that they will die, but the dead do not know anything, nor have they any longer a reward, for their memory is forgotten. He's not talking about eternal reward. He's saying you participate in the ability to either bring a reward on the earth later by doing something now, or you die and you lose your chance. If you don't do something in the here and now that leaves a better world behind you, there isn't a chance after you die to come back and do it again. You don't get round two of life. Well, you do if your name's Lazarus, but most of you aren't going to do that, okay? There are some people that God may raise from the dead, but they're not going to be a bunch of us. And frankly, for all the times you've ever heard of them, have you met one? Has anybody in the room met one? I'm not saying they're not out there. I'm saying they're rare enough. Have you met one? So we talk about that, but in the ministry of Jesus, there's really only a handful of them, and that's when Jesus was walking around intending on doing it to point as a sign to him. So don't expect, 20% of all the people we do funerals for get up and walk out of the funeral. That's just not going to happen. By the way, yuck. You're going to pull me out of heaven to bring me back to Sebring? I'm going to be mad. Verse 6. He says, indeed, their love, their hate, their zeal have already perished, and they will no longer have a share in all that is done. And by the way, those are verses right there. Mark it in your Bible, no purgatory. The whole idea that you get another round to make an impact on your eternal standing or on the temporal standing flies in the face of many scriptures. It's appointed unto man once to die and then the judgment. All right, so he gets down and he says, I've seen this thing and I'm looking at it. Now I have to figure out what to do with it. So we come to 9:7-10. And this is what he says. He says, honest gain should be honestly enjoyed. He says, go then, eat your bread in happiness. Drink your wine with a cheerful heart, for God has already approved your works. Now, that's not what you think it is. Go, cheat on the test. God says it's all right. No, he doesn't. He's saying, if you're willing to work hard and put in a full day, and you want to eat that which you raise, God is really behind you. He wants to see you actually succeed. And here's the thing. This is the verse, right there, verse 7. It's not that God will give you food. It's that God gave you taste buds. What does that tell you about God? He wants you not just to eat. He wants you to actually taste the food. God loves chocolate. You can write that down. It's holy and true. Chocolate, peanut butter, espresso, these are things that are heaven food. And what we need to know is God loves a delicious meal. You know why? You only know a delicious meal because God created you. And he didn't have to create you with taste buds. It wasn't necessary. Verse 8. Let your clothes be white all the time, and let not oil be lacking on your head. He's not saying only wear white and never wash your hair. That's not what he's saying. Remember, for the biblical person, oily is clean. Because that's how you oil your body, and that's the way you clean it. So palm oil and olive oil put together made palm olive, which is a soap. Okay? That's essentially what he's saying. Oil your body, get yourself all slick, and that means you're clean. The wet look was the Bible look. And the whole idea of this white all the time means that you're not just coming out grungy out of the field. That is, that you're enjoying it. He says, listen, I want you to love your life. Taste your food. Don't be gloomy. Enjoy life with the woman whom you love all the days of your fleeting life, which he has given you under the sun. Don't go through relationships, okay? Don't blow through marriages. You find, here's the thing, pick well and pick once, okay? There's, by the way, a really big downside to a good marriage, and that's when you lose the love of your life. That's a tough one. That's a really tough one. And he says, I just want you to really love that gal. Enjoy that time. For this is your reward in life and in your toil which you have labored under the sun. Don't make it all about your stuff. Make it about your partner. I can guarantee you guys, listen to me, if you make it about your stuff, you will be disappointed. If you make it about your partner, you're going to have a lot of fun. And so Solomon steps back, and when he comes at it, he has yet one more set of words to offer you. In 9:11, all the way through 11:10, verse 11. I again saw under the sun, verse 11. This is now 9:11. Boy, that's prophetic. I again saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, and the battle is not to the warriors, and neither is bread to the wise, nor wealth to the discerning, nor favor to the men of ability, for time, and the word chance should be the word uncertainty. For time and uncertainty overtake them all. In other words, do the best that you can to prepare for what you can, but you're not going to be prepared for the thing that gets you. I mean, honestly, I'm trying to be very honest with you. You can do all that you can do, but there are things you can't prepare for, and uncertainty is always a factor. And then he says this, moreover, man does not know his time. Like fish caught in a treacherous net. I don't want to get too deep into this illustration, but it just means you're going along in life. And by the way, if you're going to have a horrible car accident next week, you're not going to have it on your daytimer this week. Verse 13, also I came to see as wisdom under the sun, and it impressed me that there was a small city and a few men in it, and a great king came to it, surrounded it, constructed large siege works against it, but there was found in it a poor wise man, and he delivered the city by wisdom. Yet no one remembered that poor man. He said, look, I want you to understand that somebody who you don't know might be the key to the entire future of everything you need. And very often that person comes into your life and you may not remember for years. It may be years from now you realize that person really was pivotal in your life. Verse 16 says, so I said, wisdom is better than strength. But the wisdom of the poor man is despised and the words are not heeded. He says, look, even though it's better, it's not always recognized. The guy who really actually offers the answer that saves the whole situation may not be recognized when it happens. President George Bush, the younger one, he quoted this verse before he left office, and he said, I don't think that it's proper that people would try to judge a president too close to the events. History has a way of changing the way you see things. And he used this particular verse. Anyway, verse 17, the words of the wise are in quietness are better than the shouting of rulers among fools. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. Here's what he says. He says, if you are speaking wisely, you can keep your voice down and it will have more power than somebody who's speaking out of power but not wisdom. And then he goes on and he says, it's stronger than the weapons of war, but here's the thing. One guy can really mess it up badly. How many of us agree and know that, right? Now, get down to chapter 10. We're zeroing in. It says, dead flies make a perfumer's oil stink. In other words, something small can ruin something incredibly valuable. A speck of dust in a room that is developing computer hardware can ruin the entire thing. So a little foolishness is weightier than wisdom and honor. In other words, it doesn't take much to ruin a good life. It really doesn't. You can be pretty wise most of the time, but that one event, your one Chappaquiddick moment, which means nothing to you, but nevertheless, verse 3. A wise man's heart directs him toward the right, but the foolish man's heart directs him toward the left. This has nothing to do with politics, okay? You're not wise if you're on the right and foolish if you're on the left. You might be, but that's got nothing to do with this verse. What he's saying is on the right hand is the hand of honor. On the left is the hand of dishonor. He said, wisdom and a wise man's heart will direct him toward honor, honorable things. Foolish man will direct him toward foolishness. And it says, even when the fool walks along the road, his sense is lacking and he demonstrates to everyone that he's a fool. In other words, you don't have to get that close to see some people are really idiots. Honestly, that's really true. And I can probably go flipping through the channels and go, yeah, that's not happening. Yeah, no way. Sorry. Verse 3. Even when the fool walks along the road. Verse 4. If the ruler's temper rises against you, do not abandon your position because composure allays great offenses. In other words, don't get rattled if the guy who's in charge starts yelling at you. Stay at your post. Because when you don't get rattled, you show something about yourself. You might actually survive. And then it says, there is an evil I've seen under the sun, like an error which goes forth from the ruler. Folly is set in many exalted places, while rich men sit in humble places. He says, here's what I figured out. Sometimes the wrong people get promoted. And sometimes it's not even based on money. It's not even based on background. It's not based on anything. Sometimes the wrong people get the job. And you may work for one of them. And you have to understand that that's not new to you. This is not the first generation that promoted some of the wrong people. Then he says, I have seen slaves riding on horses and princes walking like slaves. He said, by the way, we got people in the wrong places, and sometimes the people that are taking advantage of the system are not the people that the system was designed for. He who digs a pit may fall into it. You got to be careful about your work. When you break through a wall, a serpent might bite you. Verse 8. He who quarries stones might be hurt by them. You got to pay attention to your work. He said, I found all kinds of people that got sloppy because they were doing their work and then they got hurt. And then he said, not only do you have to do that, you have to plan your work. If the axe is dull and he does not sharpen its edge, then he has to exert more strength. Wisdom has the advantage of giving success. In other words, plan ahead, use your mind, look at the tools. I've told you this before, but I mean it sincerely. If a child, as a toddler, doesn't learn how to clean up after his own toys, he's the guy who's going to show up as a repairman without his toolkit. We have to teach from the earliest years how to organize. The reason I don't want your dorms a mess is not because I have to live in them, not because I care. I could just close the door and act like I don't know. But the thing is, if you don't have order to your life, you are not creating what you need to become a wise person. You need order. And, somebody said cleanliness is next to godliness. I don't know about that, but I can tell you this. Order is the way God does things. Decently and in order. Now, one of the things I would tell you is that in the beginning then, there's this whole section from 9:10 to 10:11 that's all about wisdom. If a serpent bites before being charmed, there's no profit to the charmer. In other words, practice what you're doing before you get there. Otherwise, you're going to actually waste all your time trying to do it and end up with nothing but a bite. But wisdom is the first part. Words are the second part. Do you notice in verse 12 the word words? In verse 14 the word words? What does he say about words? He says, words from the mouth of the wise man are gracious, but from the lip, but while the lips of the fool consume him. Verse 14, the fool multiplies words. In other words, you're not smarter because you say more. It's the content of what you're saying. It's not just the ability to string words together. We got a lot of people that are on 24-hour news shows that can talk a lot, but they're reading it from a prompter. If they put up their 5 words of gibberish, they'll just read them. They don't know what they're saying. They're not experts. They can read. Verse 15 says, the toil of a fool so wearies him that he does not even know how to go to a city. He says, foolish people are so burdened by the plan, they can't get up and do anything. Foolish people will go, I'm exhausted just making the plan. I can't go all the way to the city. If you want to get a job, don't just sit down and plan to go put in applications. It's not till you put in applications that you put in applications. You're not doing it till you're doing it. The plan isn't doing it. And then he says, okay, I've talked to you about wisdom and I've talked to you about words. I want to talk to you a little bit about work. He says, woe to you, O land, whose king is a lad and whose princes feast in the morning. He says, listen, a land that has young people running it don't have enough of a window to see where things go. And by the way, they use up all of the resources early in the morning, sitting there getting drunk and having a feast in the morning. They don't understand how it's going to play out. And so the land is sad. Blessed are you, O land, whose king is nobility, whose princes eat at the appropriate time for strength and not for drunkenness. Through indolence, the rafters sag, and through slackness, the house leaks. He says, it's going to take work to keep your house together. And when you walk in and you see the leaky roof and the sagging rafters, what you're seeing is somebody who's not being diligent about keeping up what they have. Guys, it's great when God gives you the resources to go out and get something. Make sure you get something and then maintain it. Honestly, some of you scare me because I've seen the inside of your car. Okay? Last week's sandwich is not part of the car apparatus. I could probably go in, for some of you, I could go in and pick out all the fast food places you visited in the last month. Find a dumpster. Get order in your life. Let me suggest this to you. When you get down to chapter 11, he picks up this whole idea of how you deal with not only your work, but also wise investing. Let me just give you some words to get all the way through chapter 11. All right, you ready? In verse 1, I want you to be daring. Cast your bread on the surface of many waters, you will find it after. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, is what he's saying. Be daring. How else do you do your investing? Diversity. Divide your portion to 7 or even 8. You don't know what misfortune may occur on the earth. How about discernment in verse 3? If the clouds are full, they pour rain upon the earth, and whether a tree falls toward the south or toward the north, wherever the tree falls, there it lies. What's discernment? Some things just fall and you can't move them. There's stuff that happens and you can't do anything about it. So you need to be able to discern what you actually have control over and what you don't. And don't bank on things you don't have control over. How about delay in verse 4? He who watches the wind will not sow, and he who looks at the clouds will not reap, just as you do not know the path of the wind and how bones are formed in the womb of the pregnant woman, so you do not know the activity of God who makes all things. He says, look, don't sit around and wait until it's the perfect day to go out and sow. If you wait till there's no clouds, you're going to be waiting a long time. If you wait till there's no wind, there's some people, look, if you give a man something that he wants to do, he will find a way. If you give him something he doesn't want to do, he will find an excuse. Pick up verse 6. Determination is my word. Sow your seed in the morning. Do not be idle in the evening. You do not know whether morning or evening sowing will succeed, so whether both of them alike will be good. So here's the thing. Be determined. Do it early. Get there early. Stay late. To do it long and hard and really put yourself in it, and one of them might pay off. How about the light is pleasant and it is good for the eyes to see the sun. Indeed, if a man should live many years, let him rejoice in them all, and let him remember the days of darkness, for they will be many. Everything that is to come will be futility. Here's the thing. The word is deception. And here's what I want you to see. It's a little hard to catch. He says, you go out and the light's pleasant. It's good for the eyes. He says, I want you to rejoice in all those good days. Remember days of darkness. Everything that is to come will be empty. He says, I want you to use right now the days of your life right now. Don't be deceived into believing that it's going to be later and you'll start living then. Some of you have lived all of your life as students on your way to prepare for adulthood. Somewhere along the line you need to shift into, I'm actually living life. I'm not preparing for it, I'm actually living it. Because it's a deception to believe that there will be more time at the end. I will tell you, the people sitting behind you will tell you that every decade of your life is going to go faster and faster and faster. And all of a sudden you're going to look in the mirror and be your mom. Okay, maybe Dennis will be his dad. I don't know. Look at this in verse 9. Drive is my word. Drive. Rejoice, young man, during your childhood, and let your heart be pleasant during the days of young manhood, and follow the impulses of your heart and the desires of your eyes. Yet know that God will bring you to judgment for all these things. That's not, go do what you want, and then God's going to swat you like a bug. That's not what he's saying. He's saying, look, I want you during your early days to look at the things that you enjoy and set a pattern of your life. But know this. Whichever path you choose to go down, you'll be judged for that path. Not in a bad way, you'll be judged. And then go finally to deportation. Deportation. This is my word for 10. So remove grief and anger from your heart. Deport some things from your heart. Get rid of them. Get rid of grief and anger. Put away the pain from your body because childhood and the prime of life are fleeting. You scare me sometimes when you come in at 19 or 20 and go, oh, I'm just so achy. I'm just looking at you going, that is like the best your body's ever going to be, okay? So you're going to have to get a handle on that one. All right, I am way past my time, so I need to finish this up very quickly. I want to tell you a story that is the last chapter, because the last chapter is his final statement on life and meaning. And it's one of the funnest chapters in all the Bible. He says, remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near, when you will say, I have no delight in them. He says, life is slipping by very fast, so start off with your Creator in mind. Start the journey thinking, what does God want me to do? And know that very quickly those days will pass by you. And physically, it will be harder to be happy. I don't mean you won't be happy. I mean it'll be harder. Because you're going to have stuff that you get out of bed and it falls off. Okay? It's just not going to work the way you thought it was going to work. It says, before the sun and the light, the moon and the stars are darkened and the clouds return after the rain. I want you to see this as poetry. He's talking about a person's aging. Now, every time I do this passage with GCBI students, it's like me talking about the intricacies of the Yuan market in China. Trying to tell you about aging. Okay, look at you, now look at me. Now, here's what it says. Poetically, what does he mean when he says the sun and the light, the moon and the stars are darkened? What's the poetry? The eyes and mind, things fading. Before I begin to fade, and clouds return after the rain. That is, there's moments of clarity and then it all gets cloudy again. For some in the room, let me just say it this way. It's the many times you walk into the room, open the refrigerator, and can't remember why you're there. Okay? That's what he's talking about. Verse 3, in the day the watchmen of the house tremble, and the mighty men stoop, the grinding ones stand idle because they are few, and those who look through the windows grow dim. What's he talking about? What's the watchman of the house? The watchmen of the house tremble. Now, that I know that's not a phrase you don't have watchmen at your house. But the thing that the watchmen were known for was the carrying of the keys. And it's now trying to put the key in the ignition when the ignition won't bounce with the arm. And then he says, mighty men stoop. What are the grinding ones that got few? The teeth. Before your teeth fall out. And those who look through the windows grow dim. You can't see as well. And the doors on the street are shut as the sound of the grinding mill is low. You keep your mouth closed and you chew forever because both of those teeth have to hit that food in every direction. And one will rise at the sound of a bird, and all the daughters of song will sing softly. He says, you can't sleep anymore because anybody makes a noise half a block down and you're sitting up in bed. What was that? Furthermore, men are afraid of high places and terrors on the road. Fears increase. I don't know if you know this, but as you age, your fears will increase. One year, I was teaching this passage, and I took the students over, and we looked out the window, and there was pouring rain, and I said, if you were 94, what would you see? Somebody said, rain? I said, no. What you'd see is a slippery pavement that could send you to a nursing home that could be the last decision you ever made. Your fears increase because you don't have the nimble ability to move as well. So as you look at people who are facing that, look with kindness. They're not in the way. They're trying to judge the distances to get from here to their car. The body of Christ has to learn to care about that part too, because they're a precious part of us. They're not in the way. They're the shoulders we stand on. Here's what it says. The almond tree blossoms. There it is. Remember that the hair of the almond blossom, the almond tree blossoms, that is, their hair turns gray. The grasshopper drags himself along and the caperberry is ineffective is just reproductive. Just put that down and don't worry about it. It just means stuff isn't working that used to work in the reproductive system. For man goes to his eternal home while mourners go about in the street. It's interesting because he's a guy and he writes, all the way up until reproductive doesn't work, then you're dead. That's what he says. I mean, that's really how it's written. Okay? Remember him before the silver cord is broken. That's probably the spine. And the golden bowl is crushed. That's probably the cranium. The pitcher of the well is shattered and the wheel at the cistern is crushed. Has to do with incontinence. That's the depends segment. Then the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. Vanity of vanities, says the Kohelet. All is vanity. See, he steps back and he goes, look, don't lose track on. This is not a story of, you're going to get old and it's going to be terrible. That's not what he's saying. He's saying choose early because it's going to go by fast. Life's going to come at you so fast. And if you didn't start off with your Creator in mind, you're going to get halfway through life and never realize that you wasted half of it. But here's my encouragement. If that does happen, or a friend of yours drops by and says, I wasted half my life, just remember this. Jesus found Paul when he was half a life old. And though he was converted in his 30s, he did a good bit by his 60s and died early. 62 years old. Started 60, 70 churches. Wrote the biggest portion of the New Testament. I'd say that's a career move. I'd say he had a pretty good run. See, you don't have to have your whole life, but if you can, why not? Let's close the book. In addition to being a wise man, the preacher also taught the people knowledge. He pondered, he searched out and arranged many proverbs. The preacher sought to find delightful words to write the words of truth correctly. The words of the wise men are like goads, and masters of these collections are like well-driven nails. They are given by one shepherd. But beyond this, my son, be warned. The writing of many books is endless, and the excessive devotion to books is wearying to the body. The conclusion, when all has been heard, is this: revere God. Keep his commandments, because this applies to every person. For God will bring every act to judgment, everything which is hidden, whether it is good or evil. He says, wise words are like nails. I want you to know that. Wise words will hold your life together. God's truth will hold it together like a nail fastens a building fast. They're like goads. If you've never experienced goads are when you're trying to get the sheep to move, you use the bottom of the staff and you poke them in the rear end, and they just eat and go whoop, like this, and then they change direction. Goading. Goading is all about wise words will push you into the direction you wouldn't naturally go. Wise words will say, get up and prepare. Not a lot of people really understand wisdom. And not a lot of people really understand truth. There was a truck driver who was hauling 500 penguins to the zoo. And unfortunately, his truck broke down. He saw another truck driver coming up behind him. He waved him over. He said, look, I got 500 penguins. I need you to take them to the zoo. So he gave him money. Truck driver said, sure. He packed all the penguins in the back of his truck. He took off down the road. The next day, the driver of the first truck that had broken down had gotten his truck back on the road. He pulls into town and he sees the driver from the other truck walking across town with 500 penguins walking behind him. So he stops and he says to the guy, I told you to take my 500 penguins to the zoo. He said, yeah, but you gave us way too much money. We had some left over, so now we're going to the movies. Most people don't know how to listen to what is being said. So it's worth knowing that the wise person heeds truth and understands how to put it in a context.